The symphony hall gleamed under crystal chandeliers, a cathedral to musical excellence. Charlotte Chen adjusted her plain black dress, feeling out of place among the glittering patrons. At 32, she'd spent years cleaning these hallowed halls, dusting the very stage where tonight's competition would determine the next principal cellist for the Metropolitan Symphony. "Excuse me, you've missed a spot over there." Charlotte turned to find Eliza Whitmore, the symphony's artistic director, pointing toward a corner. Her designer heels clicked against the polished floor, diamonds winking at her ears. "The judges will be here soon," Eliza continued, not waiting for a response. "We can't have dust on competition day." "Yes, ma'am." Charlotte grabbed her cleaning cart and moved toward the indicated area. Whispers echoed through the hall as contestants arrived, instrument cases slung across their shoulders. Each carried years of prestigious training, international accolades, and the confidence that comes from belonging. "Is that Victor Kaslov?" someone gasped as a tall man with silver-streaked hair strode in. "Three-time international gold medalist." Charlotte kept her head down, methodically wiping surfaces while stealing glances at the arriving musicians. Her hands, rough from years of cleaning chemicals, ached to touch something else entirely. "Last call for contestant registration," announced a voice over the intercom. Charlotte glanced at her watch. Her shift ended in 15 minutes, just enough time. Chen, Mr. Henderson, the facilities manager, approached with a scowl. "There's a spill in the west hallway bathroom. Handle it before you clock out." Charlotte's stomach dropped. "But sir, Now, Chen, unless you want your hours cut next week." She nodded, swallowing her protest. Dreams would have to wait. Again, in the bathroom. Charlotte scrubbed at the floor, bitter tears threatening to fall. 8 years of night classes at the community college's music program, practicing in empty halls after midnight shifts, saving every penny for private lessons that most considered elementary. All for another missed opportunity. The bathroom door swung open. A young woman in a flowing concert dress rushed in, panic on her face. "Oh God, I'm going to be sick." She barely made it to the stall before retching violently. Charlotte stood awkwardly, unsure whether to leave or offer help. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. The woman emerged, mascara streaking down her pale cheeks. "I can't do this. I just can't." Charlotte recognized her as Sophie Lin, a promising young cellist whose performance videos Charlotte had studied religiously online. "Stage fright?" Charlotte asked gently. Sophie nodded, gasping for breath. "I've never played for Maestro Gershwin before. Everyone says he's ruthless." "You've come this far," Charlotte offered. "Your Bach suite recording is magical." Sophie looked up, surprised. "You've heard me play?" Charlotte flushed. "I clean here. Music is kinda hard to avoid." Sophie straightened her dress. "I think I'm going to withdraw. I'm not ready." She pulled registration papers from her purse with trembling hands. Something tightened in Charlotte's chest. "Wait." The word escaped before Charlotte could stop it. "What?" "I just mean..." Charlotte hesitated. "What if someone played in your place?" Sophie blinked. "Like who?" Registration closed. 10 minutes ago, Charlotte took a deep breath. "Like me." The first notes of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 drifted from the stage as Charlotte peeked through the curtain. The competition was underway, each contestant performing their required piece before the panel of 7 distinguished judges. "This is insane," Sophie whispered, adjusting the concert dress she'd lent Charlotte. "You're really doing this?" Charlotte nodded, fingers trembling around the borrowed cello. Sophie had been skeptical until Charlotte played a few bars in the bathroom, the rich tones bouncing off tile walls. "I've never seen anyone learn fingering that fast," Sophie had admitted. Now, backstage, Charlotte fought waves of nausea. What was she thinking? These competitors had studied at Juilliard, Curtis, and conservatories across Europe. She'd learned from YouTube videos and community college courses. "Next performer," announced the stage manager, "Sophie Lin." Sophie squeezed Charlotte's arm. "Remember, just look at the music, not the judges." Charlotte nodded, stepping into the blinding lights. The hall fell silent. Charlotte could feel curious eyes examining her as she took her seat at center stage. She adjusted the cello between her knees, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the bow. From the judges' table, Eliza Whitmore narrowed her eyes. "You're the cleaning woman." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Charlotte froze, bow suspended. Above strings. "I believe there's been a mistake," Eliza continued coldly. "This competition is for qualified musicians only." Victor Kaslov, seated in the front row with the other contestants, chuckled. "Perhaps she's going to dust the strings for us." Laughter scattered across the hall. Charlotte's face burned with humiliation. Maestro Gershwin, a silver-haired man with piercing eyes, leaned forward. "Young lady, are you registered as Sophie Lynn?" Charlotte nodded, finding her voice. "Yes, sir." "Then play," he said simply. "We're already behind schedule." Charlotte closed her eyes, took a breath, and began. The first notes wavered, uncertain. Someone in the audience coughed. Charlotte kept her eyes down, focusing solely on her fingers pressing against strings, muscle memory taking over where confidence failed. By the 8th measure, her shoulders relaxed. By the 16th, she'd forgotten where she was, lost in the music she'd played countless times in empty hallways. The melody flowed from something deeper than training, deeper than technique. Each phrase told the story of years spent yearning, watching from the shadows as others claimed the spotlight. When she finished, silence hung heavy in the air. Charlotte finally looked up to find Eliza Whitmore's mouth agape. Victor Kaslov had leaned forward, brow furrowed in confusion. "That was—" Maestro Gershwin cleared his throat. "Unexpected. Thank you, Ms. Lynn." Charlotte nodded, quickly gathering. "The music sheets and hurrying off stage. What happened?" Sophie grabbed her arm backstage. "You were amazing." "They knew I wasn't you," Charlotte whispered, panic rising. "They're going to disqualify me." "Ms. Chen." Both women turned to find Maestro Gershwin standing in the shadows. "Sir, I can explain," Charlotte began. "You're not Sophie Lynn," he interrupted. "But I'd like to know who you are." 2 weeks later, Charlotte stood once more in the symphony hall, this time with a mop in hand. The competition had concluded with Victor Kaslov winning the principal chair, as everyone had expected. Charlotte had been escorted from the building that day, certain she'd be fired for her deception. Instead, surprisingly, she'd kept her job. Maestro Gershwin had spoken privately with management. The incident was never mentioned again, though Charlotte caught the musicians whispering when she passed. "There she is," they'd murmur, "the janitor who played Bach." Today, the hall was empty, except for a chamber ensemble rehearsing. Charlotte recognized Victor leading 3 other musicians through a difficult passage of Schubert. "No, no, no," he barked at a young violinist. "The entrance must be precise. Let me demonstrate." He lifted his bow dramatically, then faltered as he noticed Charlotte watching from the side aisle. "You," he called out, "come here." Charlotte froze, then slowly approached the stage. "Have you embarrassed yourself at the competition?" Victor said, loudly enough for his colleagues to hear. Amateur technique dressed up with cheap emotion. The other musicians exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I was just doing my job," Charlotte replied, quietly gripping her mop. "Your job is cleaning," Victor smirked, not pretending to be a musician. The young violinist looked down, cheeks flushed with second-hand embarrassment. "Victor," cautioned the violist, "that's enough." "No, I'm curious," Victor continued, holding out his priceless cello. "Show us what you've been practicing in the janitor's closet. Surely you've improved since your little stunt." Charlotte stared at the instrument, worth more than she'd earned in 10 years. The other musicians watched, a mix of curiosity and discomfort on their faces. "I have work to finish," she said, turning away. "Of course you do," Victor called after her. "The floors won't clean themselves." Charlotte kept her head high as she walked away, but each word stung like salt in an open wound. That evening, Charlotte returned to her tiny apartment exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She unlocked the door to find Sophie waiting, bouncing, with excitement. "You won't believe this," Sophie exclaimed. "Gershwin's holding private auditions for a touring ensemble. He asked me to invite you." Charlotte set down her bag. "Why would he want me?" "Because you're incredible. Technically unpolished. Maybe, but your interpretation was—" Sophie grasped for words. "It was authentic, raw." Charlotte shook her head. "I made a fool of myself. You shocked everyone. There's a difference." Viktor Kozlov made it clear today what everyone thinks of me. Sophie rolled her eyes. Viktor's a technical perfectionist. With the emotional range of a metronome, Gershwin sees something in you. Charlotte glanced at her worn-out cello in the corner, the one she'd purchased second-hand from a retiring schoolteacher. "When is it?" she asked finally. "Tomorrow night, after hours." The next evening found Charlotte once again in the symphony hall, this time without her cleaning cart. Maestro Gershwin waited alone on the dimly lit stage with a music stand. "Miss Chen," he greeted her, "thank you for coming." "I'm not sure why I'm here," Charlotte admitted. "Neither am I, entirely," he replied with surprising candor. "Your technique needs refinement, yet there was something in your back that I haven't heard in years." He gestured to the chair. "Play for me, something you love." Charlotte hesitated, then removed her cello from its case. She'd chosen Elgar's Cello Concerto, a piece that had comforted her through countless lonely nights. She played the opening. Bars fighting nervousness, Gershwin said nothing, his expression unreadable. She continued, gradually losing herself in the music, as she always did. When she finished, Gershwin remained silent for a long moment. "Who taught you?" he finally asked. "Community. College mostly? Some online courses?" Charlotte looked down. "And I watch rehearsals while I clean." Gershwin's eyebrows rose. "You're largely self-taught?" She nodded. "That explains both your unconventional fingering and your unusual interpretations." He tapped his fingers thoughtfully against his knee. "You need proper training, but there's something there worth developing." Charlotte hardly dared breathe. "What are you saying?" "I'm offering you lessons, once weekly to start." She stared at him in disbelief. "I can't afford a pro bono," he interrupted. "Consider it an experiment." Before Charlotte could respond, the stage door opened. Eliza Whitmore walked in, followed by several board members and, Charlotte's heart sank, Viktor Kozlov. "Martin, there you are," Eliza called out. "We've been looking everywhere for—" Her voice trailed off as she spotted Charlotte. "What's this?" Gershwin stood. "Private audition, Eliza." "For the janitor." Victor's voice dripped with disdain. One of the board members, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, peered at Charlotte. "Is this the young woman who caused the stir at preliminaries?" "Indeed," Gershwin confirmed. "I was just offering her some guidance." "Guidance?" Eliza echoed. "Martin, we have a European tour in 3 months. The quartet needs your attention, not some charity project." Charlotte quietly began packing up her cello. "Actually," Victor interjected, "perhaps we should hear what fascinated Maestro so greatly. A cleaner with hidden talents. How charming." His smile didn't reach his eyes. The elderly board member nodded. "I missed the preliminaries. I'd be curious to hear her play." Charlotte looked to Gershwin, who gave her an encouraging nod. "The Elgar again?" she asked quietly. "No," Victor countered. "Something more challenging. Bach's Fifth Suite, perhaps? The one in C minor," he smiled thinly. "Unless that's beyond your capabilities." Charlotte blanched. The Fifth Suite was notoriously difficult, requiring alternate tuning and complex techniques. "Victor," Gershwin cautioned. "I just want to understand what the maestro sees," Victor insisted innocently. Eliza folded her arms. "It seems a reasonable request. If she's worth the maestro's time, surely she can manage Bach." Charlotte looked at the expectant faces surrounding her. This was the third humiliation, the most public yet. She could walk away now, return to her mop and anonymity. No one would blame her. Instead, she slowly unpacked her cello again. "I don't have the sheet music for the Fifth Suite," she said. "You don't need it," Gershwin said quietly. "Play what you know." Charlotte closed her eyes, remembering the piece she'd listened to hundreds of times on her worn-out headphones during lunch breaks. She'd practiced it in fragments, never believing she'd perform it for anyone. She adjusted her strings to the required tuning, aware of Victor's surprise that she knew to do so. Taking a deep breath, she began the prelude. The mournful, haunting notes filled the hall. Charlotte forgot the watching eyes, lost in the mathematical precision of Bach layered with centuries of sorrow. Her fingers found positions she'd only theorized, muscle memory forming where formal training lacked. The allemande flowed into the courante, then the sarabande. Charlotte felt, rather than saw, Gershwin move closer. his presence anchoring her through the difficult passages. The gavottes challenged her technical abilities, forcing improvisation where practice had been insufficient. By the time she reached the final gig, sweat beaded on her forehead. Certain notes wavered, others rang with unexpected clarity. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was honest. Her interpretation laid bare both her limitations and her profound understanding of the music's soul. When the final note faded, Charlotte opened her eyes to stunned silence. Victor stood motionless, his expression unreadable. Eliza's mouth had formed a small O of surprise. The elderly board member dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. That was... The woman cleared her throat. Extraordinary. Gershwin nodded, satisfaction evident in his smile. Indeed. Victor recovered first. The fingering was unorthodox. Several sections lacked proper technical execution. Yes, Gershwin agreed mildly. And yet I found myself moved nonetheless. Curious, isn't it? Eliza seemed at a loss for words, her typical composure shaken. Where did you study? She finally asked Charlotte. I didn't, Charlotte answered simply. Not formally. Impossible, Victor muttered. No one plays like that without proper training. The elderly board member approached, extending her hand. I'm Margaret Holloway, dear. I've chaired this board for 30 years, and I've rarely heard such an authentic interpretation of the Fifth Suite. Charlotte tentatively shook her hand. Thank you, ma'am. Martin, Margaret turned to Gershwin. What exactly did you have in mind for Ms. Chen? Charlotte supplied. Charlotte Chen. For Ms. Chen, Margaret continued. Gershwin exchanged a look with her that Charlotte couldn't decipher. Initially, private instruction, perhaps a scholarship to continue her education properly. Victor made a sound of protest, but fell silent under Margaret's sharp gaze. I think we can do better than that, Margaret declared. We've been discussing community outreach initiatives. What better ambassador than someone who's found her way to classical music through unconventional means? Eliza stepped forward. Margaret, with all due respect, we can't put an untrained musician in front of... I didn't say untrained, Margaret interrupted. I said we should train her, properly. And in exchange, she helps us reach communities that typically find symphony halls intimidating. Charlotte stood, cello forgotten in her arms, as these strangers discussed her future. I still have my job, she said uncertainly. My responsibilities. Gershwin smiled. Perhaps we can arrange something more fitting for your talents, Miss Chen. Victor abruptly stalked off stage, muttering about compromise standards and publicity stunts. Charlotte watched him go, a strange mixture of pride and uncertainty flooding her chest. For the first time in years, someone was seeing her, truly seeing her. 3 months later, Charlotte stood in the wings of the Symphony Hall, wearing not a cleaner's uniform but a simple black concert dress. Her hands trembled as she listened to Gershwin introducing the evening's program to a packed house. Tonight we launch our Community Connection series, he was saying, featuring both established artists and emerging talents from diverse backgrounds. In the front row sat Sophie, beaming with pride. Beside her was Mr. Henderson, the facilities manager who had reluctantly approved Charlotte's leave of absence for intensive training. These past months had been the most demanding of Charlotte's life. Daily lessons with rotating instructors, theory classes she barely understood, technical exercises that left her fingers cramping. She'd moved into a small dormitory room provided by the Symphony's Educational Foundation, her belongings fitting into 2 suitcases. Some days she felt like an imposter. Other musicians in the program had degrees, competition medals, years of formal training. Charlotte had determination and an ear that Gershwin called supernaturally intuitive. Victor had avoided her entirely, scheduling his rehearsals when she wouldn't be in the building. Eliza remained skeptical but professional, treating Charlotte with the same brisk efficiency she showed everyone. And now, Gershwin announced, I'm pleased to introduce Charlotte Chen, performing the Elgar Cello Concerto in E minor. Charlotte stepped onto the stage, the same stage she'd polished countless times. The lights were brighter than she remembered, the audience a sea of expectant faces. She spotted Margaret Holloway in the donors box, nodding encouragement. As Charlotte took her seat and positioned her cello, a loaned instrument worth more than everything she'd ever owned, she caught sight of Victor, standing at the back of the hall, arms crossed. She closed her eyes, took a steadying breath, and began to play. The music emerged not just from her fingers, but from somewhere deeper. Each note carried the weight of late nights spent practicing after cleaning shifts, of dreams deferred but never abandoned, of a mother who'd saved for her first rental cello by working double shifts. When she reached the final movement, Charlotte allowed herself to look up. The audience sat transfixed. Gershwin conducted with subtle gestures, allowing her interpretation room to breathe. Even Victor had uncrossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. As the final notes faded, the hall erupted in applause. Charlotte rose shakily, bowing as she'd been taught. Flowers appeared on stage. Sophie's doing, she suspected. Backstage, Charlotte was met with congratulations from musicians who'd barely acknowledged her existence weeks before. Gershwin squeezed her shoulder as he passed, his approval evident without words. "Not bad," came a voice behind her. Victor stood in the shadow of a curtain, his expression unreadable. "Your second position shifts still need work." Charlotte smiled. "I know. And the cadenza was unorthodox." "I know that too." Victor hesitated, then extended his hand. "Welcome to the symphony, Ms. Chen." It wasn't exactly an apology, but Charlotte recognized it for the olive branch it was. She shook his hand firmly. "I never belonged on the cleaning staff," she said quietly, "but I didn't know where else I could go." Victor nodded once, then walked away. 6 months later, Charlotte stood before a classroom of children in one of the city's underserved neighborhoods. Her cello, her own now purchased with her first symphony paycheck, rested against her knee as 20 pairs of eyes watched her curiously. "Can anyone tell me what this is?" she asked, gesturing to her instrument. "A big violin," called out a small boy in the front row. Charlotte laughed. "Close, it's called a cello." "Is it hard to play?" asked a girl with braided hair. "Yes," Charlotte answered honestly, "but most things worth doing are a little hard at first." She played a simple melody, watching their faces light up with wonder. These monthly school visits were part of her role as the symphony's community ambassador, a position created specifically for her. "I used to clean the building where the symphony plays," she told them. "I'd listen to musicians rehearsing while I mopped the floors, dreaming that someday I might play there too." "Did your dream come true?" asked another child. Charlotte smiled. "Yes, but not the way I expected. Dreams rarely follow straight lines." After the class, Charlotte packed up her cello, preparing for her afternoon rehearsal. The symphony's spring season would feature her as a soloist in one piece, a remarkable honor for someone still considered a developing musician. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophie, who'd recently won a position with a prestigious orchestra. "In Chicago. Saw your performance online last night. Still playing from the heart. Miss you." Charlotte smiled, typing back a quick reply before heading toward the door. The school principal stopped her in the hallway. "Ms. Chen, one of our students was asking if you might be able to give her lessons. Her family doesn't have much, but she shows real interest." Charlotte thought about her own crowded schedule, the techniques she was still mastering, the repertoire she was expected to learn. "Send her my way," she said without hesitation. "We'll figure something out." Outside, the spring sunshine warmed her face as she walked toward the subway, cello case slung across her back. She passed a community center with a weathered "Music Lessons" sign in the window, pausing to peer inside. Maybe someday, she thought. A place where anyone could learn regardless of background or training. Where music wasn't confined to grand halls, but lived in neighborhood corners. For now, though, she had rehearsal. Eliza had finally warmed to her presence, even offering occasional technical advice. Victor remained Victor, demanding perfection but no longer questioning her right to be there. Charlotte descended the subway steps, finding a seat on the crowded train. An elderly woman nodded at her cello case. "You play?" she asked. "Yes," Charlotte answered simply. "I do," the woman smiled. "That's wonderful, dear. Music gives voice to what remains silent in words." Charlotte nodded, thinking of all the years her music had lived only in her heart, waiting for someone to listen. Now the world was listening. Not because she had conquered it or bent to its expectations, but because she had finally found the courage to play her own song in her own way. Some talents refuse to remain hidden forever. They wait patiently, gathering strength in silence, until the moment they can no longer be denied.